There is a version of you that only exists when no one is watching. And if you're honest with yourself for a second, that version is quieter than the one everyone else knows. Smaller, more careful. Have you noticed that? Not because you're hiding something dark, but because somewhere along the way, you built walls around parts of yourself and forgot you were the one who built them. Here's the strange part. Most people spend their entire lives inside a cage, not a physical one, not one anyone can point to. A cage made of expectations, old fears, and decisions made so long ago, they don't even feel like decisions anymore. They feel like personality. They feel like, that's just who I am. But what if it isn't? Imagine a person who never raises their hand in meetings, even when they have the best idea in the room. Imagine someone who has loved someone for years but never said it, because some part of them decided a long time ago that wanting things out loud is dangerous. Imagine the person who apologizes for taking up space before anyone even asked them to move. These aren't personality traits. They're walls. And the unsettling part is, the person living behind them usually can't see the walls at all. They just see the room they're allowed to stand in, and they call that room reality. This is the cage you can't see. Psychologists have a name for how this happens, and it starts earlier than you'd think. Children are extraordinary pattern detectors. Long before they can talk in full sentences, they're already tracking what gets them love, what gets them punished, what gets them ignored. A child who gets laughed at for crying learns, without ever consciously deciding it, that emotion is something to hide. A child who only gets praise for achievement learns that being loved and being useful are the same thing. These aren't lessons anyone sits down and teaches. They're absorbed quietly, the way a plant grows toward whatever light is available, even if that light is coming from a strange angle. Here's what nobody talks about. The brain doesn't file these early lessons under temporary strategy. It files them under identity. That's the part that changes everything. A strategy is something you can put down once it stops working. An identity is something you defend, even when it's hurting you. So the guarded child becomes the guarded adult who insists, I've just always been a private person, never realizing that privacy was once a survival tactic, not a preference. Think about it this way. If you touch a hot stove once, your hand pulls back automatically the next time you're near heat, even if the stove is off. The nervous system doesn't wait for proof. It generalizes from one moment of pain to protect you from every future moment that resembles it. Now imagine that happening not with a stove, but with vulnerability. One moment of being mocked for expressing feelings, and the brain quietly writes a rule. Feelings are dangerous. Keep them contained. That rule doesn't come with an expiration date. It just runs silently for the next 30 years. This is where the amygdala becomes important, though not in the dramatic fear of lions way people usually picture. The amygdala is constantly scanning for threat, and over time, it stops distinguishing between physical danger and emotional danger. Getting laughed at, being rejected, appearing weak in front of others. These register in the brain with some of the same urgency as actual danger, which means the cage isn't just psychological. It's biological. Your body is helping you stay small, because somewhere along the way, small felt safe. But here's where it gets even stranger. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and long-term thinking, usually knows better. It knows the meeting isn't going to end in humiliation. It knows saying, I love you, first isn't going to destroy you. But knowing something intellectually and feeling safe enough to act on it are two completely different systems. That's why so many people can articulate their own limitations perfectly in therapy, in journals, in late-night conversations with friends, and still find themselves frozen in the exact same pattern the next day. It's not a failure of insight. It's a mismatch between what the mind understands and what the nervous system has been trained to protect. Now here's the part that usually gets missed entirely. This cage doesn't just limit what you do. It shapes what you want. Researchers who study conditioning have found that when a behavior is consistently punished or ignored, people don't just stop doing it. They eventually stop wanting to do it. The desire itself gets quietly edited out, because wanting something you believe you can't have is its own kind of pain, and the mind is remarkably good at protecting you from pain, even if the price is your own ambition. So the person who never asked for a raise slowly convinces themselves they don't care about money. The person who never pursued the creative life they dreamed of starts calling it just a phase they grew out of. This isn't dishonesty. It's the mind performing a quiet act of mercy, or what feels like mercy. It would rather shrink your desires than let you sit in the discomfort of wanting something the cage won't allow. Have you noticed how this shows up socially too? Some psychologists describe something called the false self, a version of you built specifically to be accepted rather than known. Everyone has one to some degree. It's not inherently dishonest. It's often adaptive. Kids raised in unpredictable homes often develop an especially sharp, false self early, learning to read a room and become whatever keeps the peace. Charming when someone needs charm. Invisible when someone needs invisible. Impressive when performance is required. It's exhausting, but it works, at least in the short term. The tragedy is what happens 20 years later, when that person is surrounded by people who love the mask and have never met the person underneath it, and they feel a loneliness they can't explain, because how do you explain being lonely in a room full of people who adore you? This is where oxytocin becomes relevant, the so-called bonding chemical. Oxytocin isn't released just from being around people. It's released from being truly seen by people. That's an important distinction. You can be in a crowded room, laughing, connected on the surface, and still not get the neurochemical reward of real intimacy. Because real intimacy requires risk, and the cage exists specifically to prevent risk. So the very thing that would set you free, being known, honestly, imperfectly, is the thing the cage was built to keep you from doing. But wait, if all of this is true, why doesn't it feel like a cage? Why does it feel like normal life? Because cages that are built slowly enough never feel like captivity. They feel like comfort. Comfort and safety share a neurological signature. They both quiet the amygdala. They both lower cortisol. They both feel in the moment like relief. So the brain starts treating safe and small as the same reward. And any pull toward growth, toward risk, toward the bigger version of your life, starts to feel like danger instead of possibility. This is why so many people sabotage the very things they say they want. Not because they're weak, because expansion has been wired somewhere deep in their nervous system to mean threat. Here's something researchers in decision-making have observed again and again. People consistently overestimate how bad rejection, failure, or judgment will feel, and underestimate how bad regret will feel. This is sometimes called an effective forecasting error. Essentially, we're terrible at predicting our own future emotions. We imagine the sting of embarrassment in vivid, immediate detail, but regret is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there for years, disguised as what-if thoughts at 3 in the morning. The cage always argues its case using the loud, immediate fear. It almost never lets you hear the quiet, long-term cost of staying inside it. Now here's the unexpected twist. The way out of a cage you can't see isn't through force. You cannot white-knuckle your way past a nervous system that believes safety depends on staying small. That approach almost always backfires, because forcing yourself into vulnerability before your body believes it's safe often creates a bigger, more convincing memory of danger, reinforcing the very wall you were trying to knock down. What actually works, according to a lot of modern psychological research, is something quieter. Small, repeated experiences of safety in exactly the areas where the cage lives. If your cage is built around the fear of being emotionally honest, the path out isn't one dramatic confession. It's 100 small moments of saying slightly truer things to slightly safer people, letting your nervous system slowly update its evidence. This is close to what's called exposure in clinical psychology. Not exposure to danger, but repeated, gentle exposure to the thing your body wrongly believes is dangerous until the amygdala finally updates the file. There's something deeply human about this. It means the walls weren't built by weakness. They were built by an intelligent system trying to protect a younger version of you who genuinely needed protecting at the time. The tragedy isn't that the cage exists. The tragedy is believing the cage is who you are, rather than something you're still wearing. Think about the person you'd be if 15% of your fear simply evaporated. Not all of it, just a fraction. The email you'd send, the conversation you'd finally have, the thing you'd finally admit you want. That person isn't a fantasy version of you. That's closer to who you actually are, underneath the conditioning, underneath the caution, underneath the years of learning that small was safer than seen. Maybe that's the real perspective shift here. You were never lacking courage. You were carrying protection you no longer need. Protection that made sense for the child who built it and hasn't been questioned since. Seeing the cage, actually seeing it, naming the walls instead of mistaking them for personality, is the first moment freedom becomes possible. And once you notice one wall, you start noticing another. There's usually a deeper one underneath it, quieter and older, tied not to what you do, but to what you believe you deserve. That's a different cage entirely, one built not from fear of judgment, but from something people rarely say out loud, the fear of being fully loved. And that one goes even deeper than this.